Benchwarmers by John Feinstein. Chapter 1. Michaels, what the heck are you doing here? The mere sound of Ron Arlo's voice made Jeff Michaels cringe. He had just pulled on a blue and gold gym shirt with the Marion Mustangs emblazoned across the chest, and there was Arlo taunting him before he could even get out of the locker room. He took a deep breath and turned in the direction of Arlo's voice. "Same thing as you, Arlo," he said, trying to sound as matter-of-fact as possible. "Trying out for the team." Arlo smirked. He was at least 5 inches taller than Jeff, probably 5'6" to Jeff's 5'1". Only a month ago, Jeff's parents had made a big deal out of Jeff going past 5 feet on his 11th birthday. Arlo was the jock king of the 6th grade at Marion Middle School. When teams got chosen in the schoolyard, he was invariably one of the captains. He wasn't the tallest kid in the class. Actually, Clara Daniels was, but he was clearly the most athletic. Jeff had known Arlo since the 3rd grade, when Arlo had enrolled at the town's elementary school. Back then, Arlo wasn't much bigger than Jeff, but the first time they'd played touch football during recess, Jeff had lined up on defense against Arlo and then watched helplessly as the new kid raced past him to catch an easy touchdown pass, as if Jeff were standing still. It was the same in basketball. Arlo was the first kid in the class who could make a 3-point shot. And in baseball, he was the best hitter Jeff had ever seen and made playing shortstop look easy. Jeff wasn't bad at sports. He wasn't as strong or athletically gifted as Arlo, but he knew how to play. He wasn't the fastest player on any field or court, but he often anticipated where the ball was going and got there before the ball did. He never forced a shot in basketball, even though by the time he turned 11, he was a pretty good shooter and knew how to find an open man. Jeff had never formally joined a soccer team before, but he loved when his dad took him to see the Philadelphia Union, the city's major league soccer team, and he'd played enough pickup games at school and in the park near his house that he understood it and thought he had a chance to be pretty good at it, if only because of his ability to see things before they happened. For as long as Jeff could remember, sports had played an important role in his life. His dad worked at NBC Sports, Philadelphia, as a reporter, and Jeff often went with him to games and had met some of the area's most famous athletes, including Carson Wentz, the Eagles quarterback, Joel Embiid, the 76ers star center, and Jim Curtin, who had coached the Union. He'd even met Rocky Balboa himself when Sylvester Stallone came back to town for a dinner celebrating the 40th anniversary of the most famous movie ever made in Philly. The Hollywood star had been very nice when Jeff's dad introduced him, but all Jeff could remember about him was that he was not nearly as big a guy as he expected. The 6th grade soccer team was brand new at Marion Middle, as well as at other schools in the region. Previously, 6th graders had been allowed to try out for the so-called varsity team, made up mostly of 7th and 8th graders in each sport. Only on very rare occasions did a 6th grader make a varsity squad. Apparently, enough parents had complained about their kids not having an opportunity to compete for an entire school year that Marion had created a 6th grade boys soccer team and a 6th grade girls field hockey team. There would also be 6th grade boys and girls basketball in the winter and softball for boys and girls in the spring. Jeff was thrilled when he first heard there would be 6th grade teams. This was day 1 of tryouts for the soccer team. 15 kids would make the team. Realistically, Jeff figured his chances of making the cut were about 50-50. There would be a basketball team in the winter. Jeff knew that would be his best chance to shine. His smarts and understanding of hoops would help him there. Soccer was more about speed, and instincts. Jeff had average speed at best and wasn't yet certain if his instincts for the game were any good, since he'd never played it formally and certainly never 11 on 11 on a real field. 4-on-4 pickup was a long way from what he was hoping to do this fall. Still, he had enjoyed playing pickup soccer, even though he'd never actually joined a youth team. He had always played flag football in the fall and baseball, starting with t-ball in the spring. So compared to some of the other kids who had played in youth leagues in the past, he was inexperienced. Yet, another reason why he was somewhat skeptical about his chances of making the team. About the only thing he knew for certain was that Arlo would be one of the stars on the team. But he wasn't about to back down from his bullying. As Jeff tried to walk past him to head from the locker room to the field, Arlo stepped in front of him. "If you make the team," he said, "it'll only be because your old man's on TV." Before Jeff could answer, another voice came from behind him. "Shut up, Arlo," Danny Diskin said. "Give the bully act a rest. We'll all get judged by Mr. Johnston on how we play, nothing else." Danny was about the same size as Arlo. He wasn't as good an athlete, but if a fight broke out, Jeff would probably bet on Diskin. Apparently, Arlo agreed. He waved a hand in disgust at Diskin, and rather than just move out of Jeff's way, turned and started jogging in the direction of the door. "Thanks, Danny," Jeff said. "I'd almost rather lose than play on the same team with him," Danny said. "Come on, let's go." They joined the rest of the boys, making the walk from the locker room to the field where the 6th grade tryouts would be held. Marion was a big middle school with about 1,000 students in 3 grades. Its athletic facilities were sprawling. A main field with artificial turf, lights for night games, a running track, and grandstand seating for, Jeff guessed, a couple thousand people. Surrounding it were a patchwork of practice fields crawling with kids. The boys and girls varsity soccer teams, which had been practicing for 2 weeks, were already at work with their coaches. Closer to the main red brick school building was a worn-out field, more dirt than grass, that was mainly used for gym classes when the weather was warm enough. Now it would be used by the 6th grade soccer team. As they walked to their field, Jeff kept looking around, trying to count how many players were there and figure out where he might fit in terms of ability. He guessed there were about 25 guys. "It'll be close," he said under his breath as they made their way to midfield where 2 men waited. Both were 6th grade teachers. Hal Johnston, the head coach, taught geology in real life. Jason Christ, his assistant, taught American history. Jeff was in Mr. Christ's class and liked him a lot, even though the school year was only a couple weeks old. He knew nothing about Mr. Johnston other than the fact his friend, Frank Rickleen, who was in his geology class, said he was very strict. Mr. Christ was strict enough, but he also had a sense of humor. There was one other person waiting at midfield for them, Andy Carrillo. She was in his history class and in his English class, and was someone he rarely talked to, if only because he found her intimidating. She was a little taller than he was and had long dark hair that was now tied back in a tight ponytail. She was dressed like all the boys, in a Marion gym shirt and shorts, but unlike a lot of the guys, including Jeff, she also wore shin guards and cleats. Mr. Johnston stood, arms folded, while everyone formed a circle around him and Mr. Christ. "Okay, guys," he said, "a few quick things before we get started. You all know Mr. Christ, I'm sure. Out here, we are Coach Johnson and Coach Christ. Or if it's easier, Coach J and Coach C. We'll have 3 days of tryouts. Jason, how many signed up again? 26, Jeff heard Mr. Coach C, basically confirmed his earlier guess. Okay, Coach J said, nodding. 15 will make the team because that's how many uniforms we have, and that's how many players we're allowed to have in uniform for each game. We'll play 10 games against other middle schools from the North Central Philly area. The team that finishes first will get to play in the league championship game against the team from the South Central Philly area. So, let's plan on 11 games, right? They all stared for a second, not understanding he was looking for a response. Then they got it. Right, most yelled. That's right, Coach, Coach J said. Try it again. They did. One more thing, he said. I'm sure some of you know Andrea Carrillo. She has opted to try out for our team rather than the girls' field hockey team. According to the school administration, she has the right to do this. Andy, no one called her Andrea as far as Jeff knew, including the teachers in the classes he took with her, folded her arms and shook her head just a tiny bit as Coach J spoke. Does that mean I can try out for girls' field hockey? Arlo yelled. Jeff rolled his eyes. He glanced at Andy again, and now she was very clearly shaking her head in disgust. I don't know, Coach J said. You might take that up with the powers that be if you want to, Arlo. Jeff thought it was a great idea. Andy may have been intimidating, but from what he could tell, she seemed cool. He would much rather have Andy as a teammate than Arlo. He was smiling at the thought when Coach J's voice brought him back to reality. Okay, let's line up for some stretching and calisthenics, he said. Then we'll start to find out which 6th graders here at Marion know their way around a soccer field.